I'm going to start with a quick story about my kids. I have been doing this for 27 Sundays now, and we put in a lot of effort and do a lot of things during the week as well. And one day I was at home, and one of my kids said to me, "Well, Mom, I know you're scared." And I stopped him right there, and I said, "No, actually, I'm not scared. I want to be very clear about this. I see a path forward for our country that is scary, and I see that very clearly, and I see how we're heading that way, but I also see a million other paths where we can take action and prevent that scary future. So instead of being scared and focusing on the scary path ahead, I'm choosing to look at all the other paths and every day focus on trying to make those options the reality for our future. So instead of the fear, I'm trying to hone in and focus on the ways that I can make a difference and prevent that scary future from becoming ours." And with that, Julie is going to get started.
Hi, everybody. There are some more chairs back there if someone wants to grab it. There's also plenty of chairs in the front row, but I know everyone's always afraid of the front row. So before we get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today, which is how we can do more than just protesting, we wanted to stop a minute and talk about the value of protesting itself. Something that we've been dealing with a fair amount, and maybe you guys have too when you talk to people like, "Oh, I'm going to this protest," or "I went to this protest," we protest every week. You get a lot of pushback on that, even from our own friends, and even from people who are anti-Trump people. It even happens at the protest itself, where people will come up to us and start challenging the whole notion of protesting, like, "Oh, nothing can be done," or like, "No one's doing anything, and what's the point," and blah, 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 and "Why aren't you in a red state, and you're preaching to the converted," and blah, blah, blah. So, today's going to be our 27th, is that right? It is our 27th Sunday protesting. Not chopped liver. I'm going to start that with a story. There was a guy, some of you may be familiar with this famous activist, A.J. Musty, who was a labor activist, clergy person, civil rights guy, a pacifist during the Vietnam War, and he would go stand outside the White House fairly early on in the Vietnam War, before people were regularly protesting. He'd go out and stand outside the White House with a candle every night. And a reporter went up to him once and said, I'm going to quote it here, "Mr. Musty, do you really think you're going to change the policies of this country by standing out here alone at night with a candle?" And his response was this: "Oh, I don't do this primarily. I don't do this primarily to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." A big piece of protesting is what it does for us. And that's kind of, we've kind of felt that internal shift over these 27 weeks, and we hope that you have too. In terms of that internal impact, I just wanted to get 3 or 4 of you to give thoughts of an episode where our protests have had that internal impact on you. I'm going to say mine as an example. I found that every week that we're out there, on the corner across the street from most of where we are on Bloomfield and Fullerton, there's always some parent walking with their kid. It can be a 10-year-old, but it can also be a toddler. And the kid says, like, "Who are these people? And what are they doing here?" And the parents, in these beautiful tones, will say, like, "Oh, they don't, like, we had one actually just last week with a toddler. The guy said, you've heard us talk about President Trump and how he's really mean, and these people are saying, like, we don't like mean people." And the kid's like, "Oh, I get it. Like, can I do that? I think he's mean too." Every time, just hearing a parent explain to their kid what protesting is and why it means something to me. So has anyone else had an experience at our protest or another protest that you can think of or want to say? Emma.
Yes, I had an experience, but it was kind of the antithesis of your story, except that in the end it sparked something in me. I am not not a very aggressive person. And I actually was protesting, and out of Church Street came 3 very young, strapping men, guys in their 30s, who started to chant, Trump, 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 and passed me, and I honestly was triggered. I mean, literally, we hear about people being triggered, and we're like, oh yeah, I get it. They got really, I don't know what happened. I was a switch in my brain, went to another place, and I just was motivated totally on emotion. There was no logic, and I followed this very young, strapping, drunk 30-year-old down the street, down North Fullerton and across Bloomfield Avenue. I with this huge sign became like 6 inches from his back saying, due process, due process, due process. And at any moment, he could have turned around in his drunken state and just... But there was no, I was on pure emotion. And from that instance, what I do now is before I get on the corner, I say a little meditation prayer of peace for myself, so that I become more aware of this anger that is so dispersed.
Beautiful.
So that was my decision.
I want to move from the personal experience to a little bit of backup on why protesting matters. So I Googled studies on why protesting matters. And found this very cool study. I know a lot of you are going to be probably familiar with the Erica Chenoweth study, which we might talk a little bit about later. But I found a study from Stanford, a professor named Susan Olzak, a sociology professor from 2021, talking about the 3 ways that protest can lead to change. So, okay, and there's this is just for use in arguing to people who are like, protest doesn't matter, what you might say. The 3 ways in which protest has been shown to lead to change in all kinds of civil resistance movements is signaling. That means giving a sign to other people that are passing by, like, no, this isn't normal, this isn't okay, not everyone is going along with it. Number 2 is challenging those in power. Basically, we are the checks and balances in this scenario. If people aren't speaking up against Trump, if the Democratic Party establishment isn't doing enough to speak up against Trump, then we are that challenge. And truthfully, I think if the biggest impact that protesters like us has had so far have been on establishment Democrats who see oh, wait a second, our constituents want us to stand up. So we're a challenge to them too, and that matters. And number 3 is community empowerment. Building a community, which has happened so much with us in our group, and how it motivates us to I'm protesting, maybe I want to do a little more. That's kind of what led to this meeting. And it brings me to a concept which I love, which comes from one of our regular protesters, Bob Steck, there in the back, who responded to one of our weekly emails with an essay with a concept that we absolutely loved, which is Yana, you are not alone. That's the reminder that protesting gives us. Yes.
I did not make that up.
I know you. Oh, I understand. Yes, Bob sends us an essay, as actually he sends us an essay in response to every weekly email, and they're always incredibly thoughtful, and we always read them. And it's just, it's a beautiful concept, I think, at the heart of community building.
Yes.
I
heard that Harvard, and read that
yes.
Harvard decided to fight back because of the April 5th hands-off massive countrywide. Yeah, they had not decided by then, and then afterwards they were like, well, people are really not with this.
When people see that people are protesting, it has an impact, and it has an impact on us. You are not alone. So before Liz gets us into more substantive territory and frankly some of it slightly more depressing territory about the state of our country. Just let's take a moment to say we're proud of you guys, we're proud of ourselves. Let's all give ourselves a round of applause.
Now for the depressing part. Just kidding. Authoritarian breakthrough. I'm sure you guys have all heard this term being thrown around, authoritarian slide, authoritarian breakthrough. And why it's important is because it's a limited time. That means we are under the clock. This is happening right now, every single day. And the longer that it happens, the worse it gets. So there is an impetus for us to act now. The authoritarian breakthrough is defined by a short window in which the would-be authoritarian consolidates power. I know we've all seen that. The regime, it attempts to make this a really rapid consolidation because the quicker they do it, the harder it is for the checks and balances and people to fight back. They eliminate all of the checks on their power. We've all seen this too, right? That accountability is something of the past, it seems. Also, the authoritarian operates with impunity. There is no care for anyone else, no care for the country they're leading, and they just want power. So a typical regime will take actions including direct investigations of critics. We've seen some of those. They will give license to law breaking. I can think of a few people from January 6th who feel like they are free and clear to break the law. Domestic military deployment, which seems to be growing every day. Federal enforcement overreach, and the autocrat won't leave. I don't know if any of you heard this, but Gavin Newsom said that one of Trump's main supporters, funder, sent Gavin Newsom a Trump 2028 hat. It's a clear message. So I'm curious if anyone wants to call out any of the things you have seen that are similar to the list I just read, or things that you feel are this regime encroaching and having a breakthrough. Yes?
You have ICE troops making their way, usually all eastern New Jersey, west New York, they're making their way from Jersey City, they're making their way basically all porous kind of areas. And they're going door to door, house to house, and they're asking, how about the street? Okay? River South Jersey, you go all over social media, you type in 2025 music festivals is now going to be edited online. Events to speak now. And you'll see that they're California, Florida, Washington, everybody's fighting in the streets.
Yeah.
24/7. It's a situation where it's all out, unrestricted civil war. You're in a civil war.
Yes, you are.
You already fought the shots and fires exactly yet. They're using rubber bullets. But you know what? It's over.
The writing is on the wall.
I saw that, I don't know whether it was TikTok or Instagram, but it was in Seattle where that veteran was in a wheelchair.
Yes.
And some nutty white guy shot him in the wheelchair.
What?
Yeah, and he was like, you can't pull a gun on me, you know, you say you're a vet, you're going, I think he was nuts. It's really heartbreaking. There's people out there that are just like they feel emboldened to do whatever they want to do.
So what do we do? I often think, if I see that in front of me, what do I do?
All these people were running, and that's
I
probably
mean,
what I
you
would
take
do.
pictures, you video, but I want to
I
do it, but I don't think that's wise.
think you're pretty safe about it.
For now.
For now, we're saying.
Any other regime actions? Yeah.
Somebody would-
Rewriting history by deleting facts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Our voting rights are being prevented.
Mhm.
Yes. Gerrymandering. And now Abbott wants to go after the Texas Dems and arrest them all and put them all in jail.
Yeah.
You know,
Hunt them down, he said.
What's that?
hijacking or silencing the media.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's because there's been government protests as well. And we see that,
People's have broken every legal norm
Yes.
that
Yes.
we know of.
Yeah.
And they somehow managed to figure out all these really esoteric laws that nobody was using.
Yes.
And they're using them.
I think that the key, the speed is part of the key. When there's so much happening at once, it limits the ability to respond. So what does the regime want from us? Well, what they want from us is to give up on each other, to give up on democracy, to make excuses for why we aren't speaking out, make excuses for crackdowns that they're doing. Excuse it all away. They want us to choose comfort over courage. They want us to stop persuading new people to join.
Yeah.
What else do they want us to do? What else is it that they are hoping people are going to do? Can you say that again? Die. You know what? It's funny, but it's not funny.
true.
Because that is how they're treating us, and with healthcare and the CDC, that is what they want.
I just like to point out, if somebody sees ICE tagging somebody, you really can't get involved, you can photograph it.
Film, stand
But
back.
more importantly, these people, some of these people are being snatched and nobody knows who they are.
Yes.
So if you can, ask the person, what's your name, what information you can get from that person to help
Yes.
facilitate them.
Excellent point. So what do they want us to do? They want us to not notice when they're snatching people on the street.
Yeah.
They want us to cower and be afraid.
Yes.
Capitulate, go along.
Yes.
Give up.
Yes.
My brother,
pledge our fealty to them.
Oh, yes.
they want you to, my brother who is not a Trumper says, he's a couple years older than me, and he says, well, what can you do? What can you do?
That's what we're here to
And I'm
discuss.
like, I wanna hit him over the head. Every time he says that, I wanna hit him over the head.
They want us to believe we're alone. And as we're establishing right here, we are not alone. That's it.
Yeah, so perfect segue on, so what can we do here? One of the answers is protesting. Another, though, is what comes a little bit beyond protesting, which is some of what we want to talk about today, non-cooperation.
Yeah.
Basic definition of non-cooperation, and we are talking about non-violent non-cooperation here because that actually works better. Non-cooperation is a form of civil resistance where individuals or groups actively refuse to cooperate with an oppressive system, not just with the leaders, but with the whole system, but without resorting to violence. As my husband, Paul, in the back likes to say, throwing sand in the gears. There's gears in a big authoritarian regime that we're confronted with here, and the idea is to try to slow things down a little bit, to show that it's not as easy as the authoritarian regime thinks it's going to be to take us all over, that capitulation isn't really our thing. So just in just like 1 and 2 words, can anyone throw out some of the most known forms of non-cooperation? Strike. Boycott.
That's my favorite, boycott.
Yes. I'm gonna turn to
People who did successful, it's people who were successful.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was there. Good for you.
Show up in numbers at entry points for hotspots.
Call your senator, your representative.
Still pay your taxes.
Yeah, we were going all the way from, we had the far spectrum in that last answer, from calling your representative, saying I don't like what you just did, or I do like what you did, to not paying your taxes, which is a form of nonviolent cooperation that we are not recommending right now for whoever the lawyers are that might be monitoring this conversation. But it absolutely is a form, and sometimes a sensible form of nonviolent non-cooperation.
But why don't we organize that?
So we're going to break up into groups in a few minutes and sort of just talk about some doable things that people think might be worth trying in terms of non-cooperation. But just to say that those who have studied non-cooperation, which does include protests and what comes after that. There's these two great professors, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, who have studied authoritarian regimes all over the world, particularly Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia, looking for what has brought down authoritarian regimes. And they found three different things. Number one, authoritarian regimes can and are brought down by the people and civil resistance. It actually does happen. Nonviolence works better than violence in bringing down an authoritarian regime, although of course both have worked. Certainly the big violence example would be World War II. It was military might that brought down the fascists there. But in lots of examples, there have been popular movements in the Philippines, in Eastern Europe, in Africa. There have been all kinds of popular movements that have, in fact, stopped authoritarian regimes. The factor that they found, the magic number, the number of people in a population that need to be regularly and actively resisting, protesting not at an occasional hands-off rally, although you do that, but very regularly and doing other forms of non-cooperation throughout the system. The big magic number, does anyone know it? 3.5%.
11 million.
We've all been going to the same Zooms, and I think it really is a powerful notion. If 3.5% of the population is actively involved in resisting a regime, that usually, not always, but that is usually enough to bring down the regime. In the US, that would be 12 million people. Not just 12 million people showing up at a protest one day, but 12 million people in ongoing, sustained resistance. But before you get panicked because you're like, oh my God, we're not there yet, we're so far from there, movements that, even in this country, the greatest example of nonviolent resistance making a huge change would be the civil rights movement, where there was the huge rapid change that we remember is from the 1960s. But it's really important to remember, these things take a while to build. In fact, if everyone could just close your eyes and picture the August 1963 March on Washington with just, hundreds of thousands of people on the mall in Washington, D.C., black and white together, as their own song said, speaking out loudly and in a unified way. You picture, when you think of civil rights movement, that's what you think about, as if one day, all of a sudden, there were like hundreds of thousands of people on the mall. But of course, that's not how it starts. Everything comes from, I'm just gonna pass around another picture. This one's from 1942. The civil rights movement started a lot earlier with tiny actions that are maybe more equivalent to the kind of thing that we do on our corner on Montclair Sundays. Those are three men in St. Louis, Missouri, protesting a lynching and everything that went on as part of what they called the Double V campaign: victory in Europe against the fascists there, and victory at home for full equal rights for people of all races. What happened in 1963, and then the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act that followed, could not have happened if there hadn't been smaller movements first in a sustained, long way. You've got to start somewhere, and we're starting here.
For any of you who have been on the indivisible calls, you'll recognize the pillars. I am someone who learns visually, and this actually really struck a chord with me, that Trump and his authoritarian regime are up here, and they cannot hold on to this position without the support of multiple institutions. Those institutions were in place long before he came, long before this started. But now they're still standing and offering support to him and the regime without the crumbling and the cracking that we need. So each pillar is an institution, and in your handout, there are some that are businesses, labor, faith, education, civil service, and military police, but there are so many more. Can anyone share an idea of an institution that you can think of that, by doing what it was set up to do, is inadvertently supporting the Trump administration? Yes.
The legal profession.
Woo!
Yes. The legal profession.
Shameful.
Oh, yeah.
Some.
Mass media.
Big business.
Yeah.
Well, faith is yes. Anyone else have any?
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah.
Entertainment.
They're on the list.
These are great. So the key with the pillars is to think about these institutions. They function separate from this regime, and they have their own systems internally of how they function and how they continue and how they're held up. But at the top rests Trump and his regime. And so what we need to do is start to consider, which of these pillars are we a part of? There's plenty more. I assure you there are plenty more. And that's actually the beauty of this, is that some of the pillars are bigger, some are smaller, some are stronger, some are weaker. But we are all part of multiple pillars in our society. We may not realize it, we may not have thought about it before, but we all have a sphere of influence inside some institution that is holding up the Trump administration, whether or not that is their intention. Another visual that I really appreciate is the internal, the cross-section of the pillar. This is just one example. Each of the pillars will have a slightly different cross-section, but if you're a business, the center is the CEO. He holds the center of the power, he or she.
Yeah.
And then the managers would be in the ring around that, the workers who produce whatever it is that this company makes, and then the consumers who make the purchases. So all of us are consumers in many, many businesses. So maybe you're not a CEO, but as a consumer, you can start to put a little crack. And if there's enough little cracks, if you know someone who's a worker, maybe you can encourage them to start thinking about how they can make some little cracks. Julie's analogy of the sand in the gear. This is the sand in the gears. Finding those people. Not all of these people are pro-Trump and want to support him. So it's finding people who have the bit of influence to make an impact. In a faith community, it could be your rabbi or your priest or whatever in the center. And then, are you involved in that faith organization? What's your position? Are you a congregant? Are you someone who can just maybe start to speak up and say something in your faith community? All of these pillars that we showed individually are not holding him up. It takes all of them. So we need to start making cracks. And the more cracks we can make, and the more pressure we can apply to these pillars, the more they will start to crumble. And as they crumble, he cannot hold his position at the top. This is our mission. This is what we can do. It's a different way of thinking about it, because there are so many spheres of influence that we all have that you may not have identified yet in your own life.
All right, we're going to get to brainstorming in just a moment. We just wanted to introduce one more concept, moving from pillars to pizza. This is our half a pizza graphic. Just as a reminder, yes, it can be really intimidating when you're talking about trying to get pieces of society and part of the structure holding up authoritarianism to crumble. Remember, you are not trying to move someone from the full spectrum. We have here everywhere from us, anti-Trump activists, to MAGA maniac on the other side. There are actually many more little slices that you could make here, but the idea is you're not trying to turn someone who's like the hardest core MAGA person in the world into protesting at Montclair Sundays. It would be great if it's happened, but it's probably not going to happen. You're not trying to, whatever. You're not trying to turn your least favorite member of Congress, it's hard to even think who that would be, into AOC. The idea is you are just trying to move everyone one pizza slice to the left. If someone, and I think a lot of us know people who are anti-Trump, but they're not really doing much about it yet. Maybe see if we can move them towards activism. If someone is sort of moderately pro-Trump, starting to remind them of some of the things that the regime is doing that might be impacting their life in a bad way, whether it's economics or whether it's looking out in the world saying I was concerned about crime, but I'm not really sure I like the idea of masked men grabbing hard-working immigrants to this country off the street. Most Americans feel that way. They don't love it. So, you're just trying to push everyone and nudge them just a little bit. So do keep that in mind when we're gonna now break into groups for a brainstorming session, and just be keeping in mind things that you can do in our own community as something you could do individually to stand up, something you could be doing in small groups such as a book club or a church, and then maybe something that we as a whole group can be. I don't know how much you're looking for things that are kind of doable, not so ambitious. Some examples and something you could talk about in the brainstorming is how to get involved in campaigns that are out there. If people who've been going to the 1 Million Rising meetings or the Zoom meetings, the Indivisible meetings, know that lately they've been pushing a couple of really great campaigns. One is Signs of Solidarity, where you're talking to local businesses about what their rights are in terms of when they don't need to let ICE in, or maybe putting a sign on their door saying hey, immigrants are welcome here, something small like that. There's also a campaign going on against Avelo Airlines, which is the small but commercial, also a consumer airline that has most of the contracts to deport people out of this country, often without due process. So there's a move to boycott them. They happen to not, I checked to see if they fly in and out of Newark, they don't. So, but things like that, things that are smaller, as you might know if you've brainstormed before, the idea is just to let people throw ideas out. If something seems like a crazy idea, you don't say that's a crazy idea. You think what it sparks in you that might be a slightly more feasible idea. And we're gonna ask you to get in groups of about 5 or 6 people around you. We're gonna pass out legal pads to take some notes on. We had spoken to a couple people about leading some of these groups, but we actually have more people here than we expected. So people can form around Judy, they can form around my husband Paul, but other people just get people around you. Pick someone as a leader just to write down. You can take some notes on the legal pad, and then we'll do this for 10 or 15 minutes. I know it's not a lot of time, but we got to get to our protest. And then put the group's favorite ideas, maybe 3 or 4 ideas, on Post-it notes, and then we're gonna bring them back here. Oh, wait, I didn't show my brainstorming. Oh,